will be our moderator. Oh, and we do record the meetings. So, Mr. Hanson?
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it. And by the way, Eric, we had some really good discussion in our breakout session about preferences, and I was surprised thinking everyone would want to go virtual, but no, the majority is saying it's time to get back together and maybe do a mix, but that's a discussion for another day. So anyway, I know we have another meeting coming up here, but anyway, it is my pleasure to serve as moderator today. So I'm the setup man for a middle reliever and two closers, and the two closers, you can go ahead and advance the slide, please. So this is our distinguished panel. We have Chip Cernak, who's with Pareto Health. I think they are the largest captive manager in the marketplace. And then you're going to hear from two C-level folks. And I think you would agree that that's the most meaningful part, is when you hear from actual peers who have done this and can provide their perspective. Captives have been around for quite a while, more so on the property and casualty side of the house. They're somewhat newer on employee benefit side, medical captives. So that's why we're delving into it now. And our steering committee said, yeah, this is a topic that's getting more and more discussion. Let's delve into it. So go ahead to the next slide. So this is the rundown. I'm going to lead it, just a brief introduction, and then turn it over to Chip with Pareto and then the two C-levels. And then we'll wrap up with some Q&A time. And as Eric mentioned, we do want to make sure that we get the 50 minutes in for the CE credit. That's important that we abide by those guidelines. So thank you for your patience with that. So as you can see here, I titled this blah, blah, blah. This is not anything that's new, but this is a Kaiser Foundation study, really over a 10-year period for employer and employee premium contributions. And you can see over that 10-year period, first 5 years, it was a 27% increase overall, and then 22% increase. And again, I know this is old hat. We've all been talking about rising insurance costs, premiums, but that's why our discussion comes to medical captives today, and really more in the middle market, which we're going to get into. Okay, next slide. I think it's interesting, and I don't mean to be picking on what I call the BUCAs, Blue Cross, United, Cigna, and Aetna, but as employers and employees have been suffering with those increases over that 10-year period. And oh, by the way, the Affordable Care Act was passed. Can you believe it's been 10 years? March of 2010 is when the ACA was passed. But look at how well the BUCAs have done over that period of time. And that's really a part of our discussion today. They're very important in the equation, particularly in the smaller group market where that fully insured program is important. But as we get into larger groups, and we're going to discuss that, there can be more to benefit financially from the employer side than not giving all that back to the carriers, who have obviously fared very well during that 10-year period. So next slide. Okay, this is just a continuum, and there are other dots I could put on this in terms of what's available to employers today. So in the fully insured realm, this is state governed contracts where you simply pay your premiums in month to month, and the carrier is either winner or loser at the end of the year. You might say that in this realm, you're participating in the insurance company's captive. What we're going to be dwelling on today is really this captive. Down here, both these arrangements are self-funded arrangements. Captive is self-funded, which is an ERISA governed plan, but you're sharing, there's more risk sharing with other members of the captive. And then down here are larger companies that are self-funded on their own. So there is no sharing, no participating with other employers, and they probably have, in both of these arrangements, stop loss coverage, which Chip's going to get into in a little bit more detail with specific and aggregate stop loss. So next slide, please. As I wrap up, this is kind of wanting to frame this a little bit. Who's in a captive today? I did a survey of 3 captives, and by the way, Pareto is not included in this, but 3 different captive managers, and you can see it is more of a middle market play, kind of in that 50 to 500 employees. Scott's going to be a little bit outside of that. He's our last presenter who's going to talk a little bit about his experience. But as you can see, this is kind of where the averages fall when it comes to being a captive manager. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chip, but I think we do have a polling question though. In between the speakers, we're just going to quickly poll our audience to get some engagement and some participation. So go ahead, Kathy and Megan, with that polling question. Maybe.
Megan, can you please launch it?
Yes, give me 1 second.
Thanks for your patience.
You want me to start? Let's see.
You want me to come back to that, Megan? I can transition to,
Can everyone see it? I'm about to launch it.
okay,
Okay.
there we go. So yeah, first polling question, over the past 5 years, when you saw the Kaiser Foundation, where have your increases fallen? Above that 22% national average or below? Do, 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 do. Pretty even. Neck and neck. Remember, panelists, don't hit in poll.
Yeah, remember, participants answer questions to get CPE.
Thank you. Wow.
Wow.
Could it be dead even? Woohoo!
Look at that.
That's amazing. So, Megan, tell me when we're ready to move on and I'll transition to Chip.
We are good. Thank
We're
you.
there. Okay, you can see the results there. Thank you. And we'll have another question here at the end of Chip's. But we're thrilled to have Chip with us. He's a Senior Vice President of Sales for Pareto Health. I believe they are the largest captive manager in the marketplace. And he has some great insight to share into this topic today. So Chip, take it away, please.
That's great. Hey, Dirk, thank you very much. And everybody, thank you for allowing me to spend a little bit of time with you today. I'm a little concerned that this is how you spend your cocktail hour, but whatever, insurance can be fun. This will not be part of that fun though. Pareto, as Dirk had mentioned, I represent the sales for Pareto Health. We are the largest employee benefit captive in the country. And the reason we were founded was to really try to solve a problem and be on what we think is the right side of the healthcare cost increase, and that's the side of the employer. I will pick on Buka a little bit, Dirk, just because I feel I can, and you threw out their stock prices. We have a different graph, but very similar. They're doing just fine. And kind of what we are doing is saying for the small and the mid-sized employer, the deck is kind of stacked against them, and we're trying to find a way to even the playing field a little bit. The insurance industry, what's kind of wrong? I think the health insurance industry, for whatever reason, we decided that everything had to be a 12-month increment. So we've all gotten into the habit of thinking that we're going to pick what our health benefits are for this year. We're going to go through the year. We're going to put it away. We're going to get a renewal. And I just saw from your poll what your renewal results were. We're going to get really angry about it. We're going to shop around, do whatever we can. We're going to pick somebody new or else negotiate it down, and then we're going to put it away for another year. We think that's a flawed strategy. You really need to be thinking about healthcare in the long term, and that's kind of what we're trying to do, is to help with in partnership with our consultants to help our clients look at it differently. You will hear me say many times that we firmly believe self-insurance is the most cost-effective way for any employer to fund their benefits. Those who can do self-fund, do self-fund, and we'll go through that a little bit. But in order for it to work for the small and mid-sized employer, the challenge they have is they don't have the size that a large employer does. You don't have 90,000 employees that you can spread your risk. You've got maybe 50 to, the average of the captives was about 120, 140, something like that. If you have one significant issue with a group that size and a one-to-one relationship, then you've got a bit of a problem. And that's part of what a captive is trying to do, is to bring people together to be able to spread that risk out among many different employers. Size and scale also helps you on the other side of the equation. One is risk mitigation, and the other is if you can be part of a group that can go to the market and help you find great cost containment partners that will help you control that long-term spend because you're part of something larger than yourself, that's another advantage. And that's one of the things that we are trying to do, is to help our clients solve that problem of every year, at least half of you had an increase of 22% or above. Your reaction to that is generally one of two things, or both. One is that you raise your employee contributions, or you reduce the benefits, or both. And we call that the vicious cycle. And then we just repeat and we keep doing that. And we just think that's a flawed strategy. So if we break apart, Megan, if you could go to the next slide, that'd be great. If you break apart, the way to look at the different options, as Dirk had mentioned, fully insured, level funded, which is kind of a hybrid between fully insured and self-funded. They're self-funded with a one-to-one stop loss contract where you as the entity buy your own stop loss in a one-to-one relationship. And then the last is through a captive, buying stop loss through a captive. And if we look at the reality of those in a few different profiles, slices, filters, cost, volatility, and data and control. If you take a look at the fully insured, it is very predictable. But as you guys already answered in your poll, it's very high. The profits are going to the carriers, not to the employers. Under level funded, they're covertly high. They give you the option of saving some money if they do really well, and they might share half of the savings with you. So we always joke and we call that heads you tie, tails you lose. So that's kind of that split in between. Self-funding, you pay for your own expenses as you go, and you reinsure claims for those things that you can't predict, but you have a one-to-one relationship with a stop loss carrier. And that can impact you if you have a bad year or a series of bad years. And we'll go through that a little bit. And then lastly is self-funding in a captive, where you're pooling your risk with other like-minded employers that are all trying to do the same thing. And if you have a bad year, that's okay. You have a lot of other folks that are willing to help you. And that's kind of what we do on the cost, volatility. The whole goal of a captive is to take what can be this, squiggly line of volatility from year to year in the self-funded world and smooth it out, because you're spreading that risk among others. Lastly, the other major control of self-funding is data and control. In the current fully insured world, other than you guys being in Texas with, House Bill 2015, you have access to some information, but not as much as you really can get in the open market if you were self-funded. We think data, particularly for you as a CFO, is crucial in understanding how to control your healthcare costs over a long-term period. And you need that information in order to do that. Lastly, control. When you buy a fully insured plan from a carrier, you are buying their plan, a plan that they filed with that state. It is a state plan. When you self-fund, you're covered under ERISA, which is a federal program. And you are the owner of that plan, and you get to design the plan. The benefits include what you want to meet your needs. So it's a little bit like the Liberty Mutual commercials, only buy what you need. So you have a way to control that. So we think that those things are very important, why most people want to self-fund. If you could move to the next slide, that'd be great. So as I mentioned, self-insurance does cost less. If you can go to the next slide, those that can self-fund do. So 94% of employers with 5,000 employees and up self-fund. When you go to 1,000 to 5,000, it drops to about 82%. 200 to 999 employees, it's 56%. And then the 3 to 200, it's about 17%. Our focus is really the last two buckets, so the 17 and the 56%. Why do the smaller do you go, do they not self-fund? If you can go to the next slide, it's really because of the risk. It can feel too risky to self-fund if you're a group of, say, 50 or 75 employees. If you can go to the next slide, Megan. And that's because in the traditional stop loss marketplace, if you buy stop loss, and there are two kinds of stop loss. One is specific stop loss, and that covers any individual claimant up to a certain dollar amount. So you as an employer would pay, say, the first $30,000, you'd be responsible for the first $30,000 of each employee, if 30,000 was your deductible. If you had an individual had claims that were over $30,000, say $100,000, you'd pay the first 30 and you'd be reinsured for the remaining 70. The second type of stop loss is aggregate. And what that does is it covers all of the money that you spend under the deductible of $30,000. So if you add that all up, you're protected both in the total and on the individual. The problem with the traditional stop loss marketplace is something that we call a laser. And a laser is something that is born out of the definition of insurance. Insurance is where you pay a known premium to make sure that you can protect yourself from an unknown loss in the future. In stop loss, since in medical, everything is 12 months, that works great if you have a claim like a knee replacement or a colonoscopy that may be expensive, or a heart attack, or some cancers that you can treat within 12 months. The problem is if you have a very large claim that goes longer than 12 months, maybe it's 24, maybe it's 36 months, with specialty drugs now being some of the fastest, most expensive drug costs coming out, if you go that long and it continues, once it is a known claim at that next renewal, the stop loss carrier can say, here is your renewal for the $30,000 deductible for everybody except for Dirk. Unfortunately, Dirk has a known claim and his claims are expected to be $300,000 next year. So his deductible will be $320,000. So we have lasered an individual to say, I'm reducing my risk as the stop loss carrier and I'm putting it back onto the employer. So you as a CFO of a small company go, whoa, that is too much volatility. Next slide. And where the risks coming from? The advent that we have had in medical technology and in specialty drugs have been incredible. I think we'd all agree. But they come with a very significant price tag. Gene therapies can cost $3 and $4 million per treatment. Cancer treatments can be well over $1 million now. Organ transplants, well over almost $1 million. Dialysis for end-stage renal can be $600,000 a year. If you're a 50 or 70 person group and you get hit with one of these, what is that stop loss carrier going to do? They're going to want a laser. Next slide, please. So what do? In the traditional stop loss marketplace, if you could advance it, Megan, that'd be great. There is a one-to-one relationship. Stop loss is not a pooled policy, but this is just say the population that any stop loss carrier would have. Just take all of their clients and take a look at their claims experience. And you'll have many clients on the left side of this that have no claims. They actually will spend $100 or a couple $100,000 for stop loss and have no stop loss claims. But then on the other side, on the right side, you're going to have people that are going to have 3 and 4 and 500% loss ratios. And that's a natural loss curve. So what's going to happen is if you're on the left, you'll probably get a pretty good renewal. If you're on the right, it is not uncommon to see 100% increase, 150%, 200% increase in a stop loss contract. Next slide. So what we're trying to do is create stability through scale. And in a captive, the employer still purchases both types of stop loss, specific stop loss and aggregate stop loss on an individual basis. The client still pays their claims up to those points, and then they get reinsured. Next slide. What we do, though, is we rate each group coming in based on their risk and what issues they have from the past, and we'll assign a risk, and we'll do that through a premium. So one employer might be $600 per employee per month, another one might be $450 per employee per month. But what we do is we take that individual stop loss premium, and we always joke, we have a Home Depot bucket on our conference room table, and we take all of the premium we put into that bucket. If you could advance to the next one, Megan, for me. During the year, we have no idea among all of our clients who is going to have a specific claim, a really large claim, or an aggregate claim, but they reach into the same bucket and we share that money during the year. And that's part of what we do. The other thing that we do is to say, once you're a member of the captive, you will never get a laser. We have a no new laser into perpetuity contract, the only one on the marketplace. In addition, we say, on top of that, you will never get more than a 30% increase in your stop loss premium, ever. So we've really narrowed the bands on what can happen. Next slide. So we have the same loss curve that everybody else does. But what we do, if you could advance it, Megan, is we take anything over 30% and all of our members share 1% or 1.5% more than they normally would pay to make sure that they never have an increase above 30%. So we really have found a way to pull that risk together. Next slide. Lastly, I'll just close with this to give you a sense of size and scope. We are now almost 1,600 members. We have about 550,000 lives that we manage, and that number is growing very quickly. We manage over $600 million of stop loss premium, and that would put us at like number 6 as the size of stop loss companies. 4,200 renewals, and in all of those renewals, we have never given a laser. And then since inception, 97% of those renewals have been accepted. Not per year, but since inception. We started in 2012, and our first program is coming up on its 10th anniversary. So we think that we've designed something that is working for that mid to size employer to say, be a part of something bigger than yourself, share the risk, and find a way to do it better. So, thank you.
Okay. One of the things that I've been reminded of is to make sure we share the polling results. So it was a pretty even split, 50-50 on that first question in terms of who was above that and below the 22%. So at this point, in keeping with the topic here that Chip mentioned, large claim exposures, we wanted to just poll the audience real quick to see what has been your experience with large claims. What size? So go ahead, Megan. I hope you can tee it up sooner than it took last time. No pressure.
Perfect. Starting it up now. 60 seconds on the clock.
All right. Okay. As you can see, we've seen claims go up dramatically over the last 5 years. So what are some low? There's one over $1 million, 750. So largest claim that you've seen.
So Derek, I just, knowing you might ask that question, I asked, this year we have had a $6 million claim. Wow. That's for a NICU child with a double heart transplant. First one did not take. And we've had multiple Zolgensma claims, which is for muscular atrophy, spinal muscular atrophy. And each one of those were about $2 million a piece this year already.
Wow. Yeah, so
So any one of those individual employers would have been stuck with those on their balance sheet, so to speak.
and one thing Chip didn't get into was the whole pharmacy piece. We've seen incredible costs coming from the PBMs of pharmacy benefit managers where drug costs are just extremely high. I mean, the blood situation, the hemophilias, the Chip, what are you seeing on some of those treatments?
Oh yeah, and once they're there, they're there. It's about, you know, $1 million to $1.5 million per claim per year on some of those drugs. They do wonderful things, but they're just very expensive.
Yeah, and that's the thing I always like to tell an audience, and when we're meeting with employers, is listen, this is kind of good news, bad news. It's awesome if you have a child or if you are impacted by these large claims. They're miracle drugs or life-saving, life-giving drugs, but paying for those and just what it does to the whole cost system is something. So, okay, we're just wrapping up here. And by the way, questions are coming in from the chat line. Thank you. I am going to ask those questions at the end to our panelists. So thank you. Feel free to ask any questions on the chat line. So as you can see, they're 45% less than 250, but yeah, there've been a few here as high as $1.7 million, 10%. And again, the whole idea of being able to share that risk and what the captive provides is so important. So thank you. So next of all, we're going to bring in the closers, the two C-level people. And we always feel like this is the most important. Chip, thank you so much. And just the knowledge and expertise that you have as a captive manager. But we're going to hear from two C-level people. One of them, Emmanuel, who's first up, is on our steering committee, and we thank him for agreeing to participate. He is going to talk briefly about his experience going from the old world, which I assume was fully insured, and now he's been in a captive for a period of time. So Emmanuel, please take it away.
Yes, thank you very much. Chip, thank you so much for your presentation. I was nodding the whole time. We're a classic case study of the flawed approach to health benefits, and then hopefully a favorable turn over the past 4 years into having joined a captive. I'm the CFO of Overwraps Packaging. We're a privately held manufacturing company. We manufacture in one site in Dallas flexible packaging, mostly plastic or foil, for food packaging applications for the most part. And we actually also print substrates for those disposable face masks that you all have learned to love and use over the past year or so. For decades, Overwraps and our population were covered through the fully insured format. And just like Chip said, while we started with a very competitive plan, a plan filed with the state, where our individual deductible was $250 per employee, $500 for employee and family. We were classically exposed to uncontrollable rate increases year after year. And more importantly than I first envisioned, an absolute lack of information as to how our plan was used by our covered participants. We were a small company with, and we still are, but we were even smaller with about, when I joined the company back in 2006, 70 employees and probably about 110 covered participants. And we could guess that amongst our employees covered, young hourly paid employees participating in the plan would probably go to the doctor, their PCP, once a year. They were not fully utilizing the plan, had no need for it. So we had a competitive plan, and we had an employee population that was not using the benefit that much. I think it created a certain lag for us to really react to the ritual of the yearly renewal and what can be tweaked. And obviously, ultimately, the game was a leverage between how much of a premium increase can we afford and how less palatable can we go in terms of palette of benefits for our constituents. Not a long-term strategy at all. And it came to a screeching halt in 2012, anywhere between 2012 and 2014, where we had at that time a individual deductible that has shot up from $250 to about, I think it was $1,000. And I think the family deductible went to, at the time, $4,000. We were contemplating tweaking more things. Co-insurance went from 90% to 50%. There's so much you can do, and still we were plagued with the lack of information as to how the adequacy of the benefits that we were providing to our constituents. In 2015, we engaged in a longer-term approach, which was to promote wellness and healthy habits within our constituents. So we decided along the fact of adding services and benefits to our constituents that promoted exercising, good nutrition, healthy habits. We set up a premium incentive for those participants who would, those employees, not all participants at the time, but those employees who would participate into a wellness program, which included, or the first step was, if you're not a tobacco user, you are eligible for a discounted premium, assuming that you agree to test certain biometric criteria, and if you pass, then you get access to the discounted premium. It was a success the first year, and a natural sequitur to this program was to join a group of other companies that had the same kind of incentive program to not do it at all. It's the captive game is all about risk reduction or dilution through pooling, just like Chip said. I believe that for us, what really made a difference was that we found, or we were offered by our broker, to join a captive that really met our objectives in terms of creating a long-term awareness for our participants. We looked at different captives, and well, we got more information from our broker for the captive that they promoted. The captive is owned by Holmes Murphy is the broker. They're owned by our broker. So we thought it was the easiest route for us to join that captive, and we were very compelled by the fact that Overwraps joining the captive was a small participant, a small member with room for growth. Overwraps was well into a wellness incentive program, which placed the company within the slightly over the average of what a typical member of the captive was doing in terms of promoting wellness. So it was a really easy decision for us to join the captive. The captive is called Wealth, W-E-L-L-T-H. It was created in 2012. At the time when Overwraps joined the captive, it had, I believe, it had about 30 members. and it had actually 29 members and 2,800 covered employees. And as of this was in 2017 when we joined the captive. Today, the captive has 55 members and just north of 7,800 covered employees. They span 21 states. We're a manufacturer. There are a few others, but there are also law firms, architect firms, distribution companies. So the profiles are very different, which to us was also fairly important, having different geographies and different sectors covered through the captive. Our perception was that it would also help us diversify the risk or dilute the risk. But most importantly, each member has committed to a development plan within the captive where they will abide to certain, to put in place in their, with their population, certain incentives to promote wellness and health on a long-term basis. It's a very long-term approach. It's not something that you can see the results of at each renewal. Yet our experience with the captive has been so far very positive. We estimate that we've saved since 2017 probably anywhere between 10 to 15% in annual premium savings. The captive itself has been fortunate enough to never have really a loss, and the captive has been able to return monies to each of the members since its inception, and more so from 2018 to 2020. So it's been a very good run. Is it the solution to all problems? Not at all. It's probably not for everybody. First of all, you have to commit to being a captive member and to continue to implement measures that really help your group as much as the other members. Is it also the solution for ultimately as we continue to grow, perhaps for a small one location manufacturing company like Overwraps? But I could see how some members of the captive that are much bigger than we are would want to explore the self-funded route standalone without the captive, because at the end of the day, the captive has rules, and it may not be a fit as you grow. But I have to say that it's a very successful, it has been a very successful move for Overwraps so far. And it's not only the money that we think we've saved, which is obviously fairly important, but it's also the fact that we are a master of our own domain in terms of offering benefits that really make sense to our constituents. We know we have the data now that we're fully insured. We have access to any granular, at any level, all the claim data that we can hope for, and we can use it effectively to tailor a plan that really meets the needs of our participants, to the point that we have had many more participants since 2017, 2018 to our plan versus when we were fully insured. So I'm here to share with you an experience that was very successful, kind of dictated with by the fact that we had a very biased broker who wanted us in their captive, but in hindsight, the move has been extremely beneficial to Overwraps.
Manuel, thank you. Appreciate you sharing your experience, and coming from a CFO, it's even more meaningful than a sales guy like myself. But you know, so we're going to take another polling question, and then we're bringing in another C-level person. Scott is going to share, and I think you'll be very interested to hear Scott's perspective, because he is larger than most that are in a captive, but he will have an interesting perspective. So Megan, next polling question.
And it should be up now.
Okay, you can see there, 62% no, I've never considered it, 38% yes. So anyway, that's awesome. So thank you for your participation. We're going to go to our final presenter, and then we're going to have time for some questions. So Scott, he's going to talk a little bit about their experience. Forgive him. I think he is a Patriots fan. So we have a little contest here on Thursday night, but nonetheless, Scott, please share your experience with the captive world, medical captives.
Absolutely. Thank you for hosting this. And I'll try and jump right in because I know we're getting close on time. A little bit about our company. We're a manufacturer. We're in, well, when I started with the company, we were just in rural Maine. Over the last couple of years, we've had some rapid growth. As a result of COVID, we're actually a swab manufacturer that's the largest manufacturer in the world for COVID test swabs. So in the last year, we've added 2 new factories in Maine, and we have a 3rd factory being built in Tennessee right now. So we've been growing. But as far as with our health plan history, we're a long-term self-funded group prior to joining a captive. We had been self-funded buying stop loss on the traditional market. We had experience with multiple different stop loss carriers. I think in the 5 years that I was with the company prior to joining the captive, we had 3 different stop loss carriers. And the reason for that is much like Chip described, as we'd go through a renewal and we had a bad year, they'd come in with a big laser. And then we'd be trying to figure out, okay, do we want to move? Because if we move, we may get a good rate this year, but next year it's going to change. And the bigger problem that I had was just the process of going through a renewal where you need to supply all your health information for all of your employees, and you're waiting to get a quote back. And once that quote comes back, you're having to look at it and say, okay, is this good enough? Am I willing to just bind this coverage right now? Because if I wait, I might get a better quote from another carrier that's still got the data out there. But also if I wait, there could be another claim that comes in that I have to report that's going to be another laser. And it felt dirty, for lack of a better explanation. I didn't like it. And I was looking for a different way to do that. But actually, when the way we came across the captive that we are a member in now is, I was speaking at the same conference for our third-party administrator that the CEO of the captive was speaking at. And as I go through the other slides and talk about how we made our decision, it kind of lined up that basically we realized there was a different way of doing it, and we learned a lot about them. And I realized that their view of how to approach healthcare on a long-term basis, driving primary care and things like that, aligned with a lot of things that we were trying to do. So that's really where our relationship started. But if we can go to the next slide, I'll talk about how we came about making this decision. So when we were looking for a captive, I'll say some other things that some people on this might not like. I actually had no broker or consultant prior to joining the captive. I had one that was not so good of a broker. So I removed them from the equation, and I was buying stop loss directly with some assistance from my third-party administrator, because I didn't feel like they were doing anything for me. They weren't bringing anything to the table. They weren't even really involved in the process that much. So I had a bad taste in my mouth about dealing with brokers or consultants in any way. But when I was speaking at this conference and heard a little bit about what could be done, the vision of the captive with how they focus on healthcare lined up with the vision of our plan, how they wanted to make sure that we're driving primary care, spending money on the early parts of care so that you don't get to the more expensive care. That really lined up with what we were doing, because we were there talking about how we had developed a disease management program for our diabetics, where we were paying for more coverage, paying for more care in order to try and decrease our costs. And it was something that then afterwards, myself and the CEO of the captive kind of had a longer conversation about how we're doing that and what it would do. We did like the idea of a shared risk profile. And when we joined the captive originally, we were around 350, 360 employees. So on the larger scale of what the captive was, and the captive we joined, I think we were either the largest or the second largest member at that point in time. Since then, there have been other groups that had been larger than us. I believe now, because we're now at about 1,200 employees, that we probably are the largest member in the captive. But the shared risk profile still works for us because of the pool that we're sharing it in. We really went into that at the start, where we were saying, okay, we can share the risk profile and look at that. But also we found the captive we looked at was looking for quality results. It wasn't about today. It wasn't about this year. It was about a longer term. And that really was important to us. And the final thing on when we were selecting it, why we were going to do a captive, even though we're a large group that was fully self-insured, they brought a lot of tools to the table that I wasn't seeing. Part of that was probably caused by myself when I fired the broker and didn't really have access to these things. But I was introduced to a better broker partner that was able to do these things. And as we've stayed in the captive, we've developed a lot of relationships, not just with our captive manager, with other brokers around the country, but also with other members, where there are members that I talk to. If we've got a question about how to do something, I can call someone that's in Wisconsin and say, hey, what do you do here? Or I call someone else that's in Colorado. Hey, how do you handle this? What have you done here? And we all share that knowledge back and forth. So it's been very positive. If we can go to the next slide. Our experience in the captive is really part of why we're there. The first thing is if your captive manager delivers what they promise, it makes it very easy for that. And some of those things that they deliver what they promise is some of the topics that I'll talk about here. But I have no problem with acknowledging that what I've been told by the captive manager is what I've received. I've been in the captive since 2014, so we're on our 7th year that we start on October 1st of this year. The members in our captive, and this is something that you don't know until you really get in, they are all very engaged. They want to have high quality health plans for their employees. They talk to each other. They attend members meetings when we have them. And they really want to support everyone getting better results and even push people. We have discussions about, well, geez, are these people doing enough? Should we find a way to push them out of the group, which hasn't happened, because everyone comes along and sees the results of high performing plans and says, hey, we want to do this because we realize we can get better. The predictable and timely renewal process, the latest I've seen a renewal for 10/1 in my 6 years of being here is the middle of August. And that wasn't anything to do with the captive manager. That was to do with, we changed broker partners and they wanted to have the actuarial data to go with it at the same time. So it's been predictable and timely, but also every year what I have expected to get is what I've received on my renewal. If I think it's going to stay the same, it stayed the same. If I think I'm going to pay less, I'm paying less. If I thought I was going to pay more, I'd pay more. Additionally, we are in a new laser captive. We have one laser that we entered with 7 years ago. That's it. There have been no new lasers. That's a huge benefit to a company of any size because it reduces the variability of what we're going to spend. Also, we have new tools every year. So our employees get new tools, new benefits every year from us being in the captive. And they really benefit from those, which is helping to drive our costs down and have a really good employee experience. And then the last part is there's always that continuous improvement. That is driven from both our captive members and our captive manager. If we can go to the next slide. Why do we stay? I kind of talked about this. It's a common threads here, but we've had such rapid growth in our company that honestly, could I probably leave the captive and save some money being self-funded at my renewal on 10/1 this year? I probably could. We have too many moving parts right now. It's not something that I want to move because our captive runs well, it's managed well, and our costs are in line. Additionally, the members are engaged. So even though I'm the biggest member of the pool, I don't mind sharing my risk because I like what the people that are in the pool are doing. And I know that they're contributing to help drive the costs down and continue to allow me to keep my stop loss premiums well ahead of where the marketplace average is. I won't share what those are, but they definitely are well below that 22% number. And that really goes to the results. I would say my results are not typical, but in our 6 years of being in the captive, my employees' premiums have not increased 1 penny in 6 years. This year is going to be year 7 of not increasing it. And we've added benefits over that time and lowered their deductibles. So every year we're getting the performance that we need to keep giving our employees better benefits. And in this marketplace, it allows us to recruit and train employees better. And the execution of the strategy, everything that's told, the focus from when I started in 2014 until today, it's the same focus. There are different tools. We're looking at different metrics, but everything is driven by the same goals and strategy for that. And the last one is the people, the captive that I'm in. There are really good people that run the captive. They manage it well. They keep us engaged, and they've become business partners. They've also become friends over the course of working with them for 7 years. So even though we're not your typical captive member, it's been a great decision for us, and the owners of our company have received huge dividends from doing that.
Scott, thank you.
You're welcome.
Just some key points that I heard you say: predictable and timely renewals, engagement of the other members, fellow members of the captive, and then, wow, 7 years, no rate increases. I mean, that speaks for itself. So thank you so much for your perspective. So we are coming close to the end, but we still have a few minutes, and I'd like to ask some questions here. We did have some questions from the audience. So real quick, how do you know if you're selecting the right captive? I mean, they're popping up all over. I'd like to throw it out to the group. How do you know? You know, Scott, you're talking, you love your captive. Manuel, you're saying, man, it's been fantastic. So give some data points or some consideration there. How do you know if you're selecting the right captive?
Dirk, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
I forgot the polling question.
Yes, we just want to make sure everybody gets CPE credit. So let me,
I'm sorry.
Give me 60 seconds. We will share this last polling question. It is
Sorry.
launched. No problem. Just want to make sure everybody gets CPE credit for this afternoon.
Panelists, think about that response. So yeah. So this was kind of outside the box question. So COVID has impacted people in different ways. Certainly Puritan Medical Products, what they manufacture relative to COVID, it was a big boom business-wise, but just trying to get a feel for our audience. Better 19%, worse 48%, remain constant 33%. So yeah, negative impact for almost 50% of the group, and then small percentage better and remain constant. Okay, so thank you for that response. Okay, so panelists, how would you respond to that? Scott and Manuel, how do you know if you're selecting the right one?
It's really like interviewing an employee. I mean, don't just take the word for it from a consultant that says, hey, here's what you need to do. You need to talk to some people that are in there. And I can say I'm so engaged with my group that I talk to people. I am that reference that answers calls for our captive, and any captive that you're going to join, you should be able to talk to some members and find out what their experience is before you get in.
Nothing really to add on this one. It's exactly the same thing. And we interviewed about 4 or 5 members who had the same, I mean, it was a consensus, lots of engagement and flexibility. So
Great. Okay. Another question here that came from one of our audience members. So sharing of information within the captive, they were concerned, isn't that a little bit proprietary, HIPAA violation? What are you sharing within the captive and really knowing what claim activity is going on? How is that handled? And Chip, if you have any thoughts there.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. The only information that any other member sees is aggregated data. So nothing that is protected because, everybody needs to make sure that we absolutely follow that guideline.
Yeah.
And even within an organization, there are very careful rules about who can see what. So, Emmanuel, as you're talking about having all that information, there are firewalls around how you control and use that information to protect individuals. Also saw another question about leadership who may lay off folks based on that data. That's the quickest way to end up in jail. So I would highly, highly recommend that never happen. In a previous life, as a president of a TPA, I fired a client who wanted to do that. And I'd rather not have them as a client than have them be involved with that.
Thank you for answering that. Appreciate it. So talk a little bit about the renewals, the timing of renewals. Do all the captive members renew at the same time? Talk a little bit about that, because that seems a little bit confusing.
Very
Want me to jump
quickly
on that
for,
Okay.
Who do you want to answer that one?
Chip, you're speaking now. How do you guys handle that?
Sure. We need about 80% of our clients' data in order to start our negotiation with the carriers that we work with to do a renewal. So we try to get out in front of that early. We also engage our clients by asking them to brag about all the stuff that they're doing on cost containment, because we want to give them credit for it as they go forward. So there is a lot of give and take. We are in the process of creating our own data lake by integrating with all the TPAs and carriers that our clients work with, so that we don't have to wait for the data anymore. It comes to us automatically. So in the coming years, we'll just be pushing out renewals because we'll already have all the data.
Yes. Okay. Have you ever had to kick somebody out of, Emmanuel, did you have anything to add to that on the?
no, I wanted to say our plan, our year is on an 8/1 renewal. The captive is on a 5/1. Most of the members are on a 12/31. It doesn't create any problem. The data is there and it's actually consolidated.
Okay.
So it's a non-issue.
Have you ever had to kick anyone out of the captive? Scott, Emmanuel, you're talking about being good stewards and trying to do what you can to operate your plan. Have you ever had bad members where you're like, we don't want you anymore, you're not being a good participant?
I believe there might have been one or two that in one of our groups that it happened. The other thing about the captive I'm in is they're very particular about which consultants work with their members. And in the event that someone, I think it's more common that someone signs a BOR, changes their broker, and then they're not with a supported broker. And because we are very engaged, if that doesn't happen, I think that's probably the biggest cause of when people decide to move. And everyone in the captive is fully aware of what happens. If you choose to go to an unsupported broker or consultant, that could mean that you're having to move out. But I'm not sure if anyone else has been removed for cause.
I would agree. We are all subject to certain grades. We have a scorecard on attendance, on the implementation of certain programs. Before nobody's been kicked out so far since 2012, but there's always that threat. But it's just, before that happens, there's probably going to be many discussions and help from different members to remedy the problems.
Kathy, Megan, how are we doing on time? Are we cut off here shortly? What's the time situation?
10 minutes left.
10 minutes? Okay. You see the question there, Chip, from
Yep.
Stephen? I think that's the last question that we had. So do you mind responding to that?
Sure. A captive, I would say, is more of kind of like a not-for-profit insurance company made up of its members. Now, I can say that ours is member-owned and governed by its members. It's not owned by Pareto. It's not owned by the insurance companies. It's not owned by any of the brokers we work with. It is truly set up for the benefit of the employer. So we run it like a not-for-profit to make sure that all benefit goes to the employer. We do work with brokers, but they have to be carefully screened and approved. So we don't work with all brokers. And no, we've never done anything with a PEO.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, I'm just gonna do kind of a wrap up here. I think we've taken all the audience. One question came in about COVID. COVID claims really didn't represent high cost claims, or am I wrong there? When you look, Chip, across, and I don't know, Scott and Emmanuel, did you have any big high dollar ones?
We did.
Okay,
They were not treated any differently than any other high claims.
what was
and
the
just-
dollar threshold, Emmanuel? How much did, I mean, are you talking 200,000?
We had one claim with obviously the COVID and complications, and ICU for 6-7 weeks early in the 2020 COVID era, went up to $425,000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you, Scott? Did you have anything that high?
We've had virtual, and again, I saying this is not a good thing. We've had very few COVID claims. I think we just might have had our first hospitalization, and I'm not even well, as far as employees go, we've had our first hospitalization, and I'm not even sure if they're on the plan. But we are in a rural area, and we have not been drastically impacted. To put it in perspective, we're the lowest population density county east of the Mississippi River.
Wow.
Mm.
Well, Emmanuel, 450, that's significant. I didn't,
Yeah.
that's much
Dark.
higher than what I would have guessed.
Oh,
Yeah,
We have one in Houston. I was just going through with one of our consultant partners in Houston as they're preparing for renewal, and they have a claim that will be over $900,000 for COVID.
wow. Well, there you
Yeah, for a
go.
company like ours, it would have been an absolute disaster. It's kind of dry to say, but it's having had the captive model here, and this is not obviously something that is subject to laser, the COVID aspect of it. Now, if it's a known risk and a recurring, there are complications, and it's a continuing situation, it could be laser. Our captive does not have a no laser policy. We have a laser framework with certain levels depending on the size of the member, and caps, self-insured retentions, if you will, per laser. But those lasers are out there.
Yeah.
So
Thank you for clarifying that, Emmanuel, because I was familiar with some of the other captives do have, lasers are allowed with certain parameters. So
Right.
thank you for clarifying that. Well, let me just put it to the three panelists as we wrap up. Is there anything else that you would say, man, if I had one thing to say in advising an employer about considering a captive, is there any just closing statements that you would make?
Dirk, my first comment would be, I think it's one of the questions that was kind of embedded in there. What's a good profile of a client for captive? In our mind, it is the mindset of the leadership team. We are looking for the CFO or the CEO, the president to say, hey, we want to do it differently. We want to roll our sleeves up and we want to solve this problem. And we know we got to work at it. That's what we're looking for. So if that sounds like you might have a nice home.
No more year-to-year deal
Exactly.
with it. Yeah.
And I'd follow up with Chip, because I may actually predate Chip. I am with a Pareto captive, but our reinsurance company behind the captive, when I became a member, didn't want us. They said we were too much of a risk and that we shouldn't be in the captive, and that it was going to be disastrous for them. And I won't share my loss ratio, but Chip can back me up that I probably have one of the best loss ratios in any of their captives right now. Because again, it's all about our mindset, our plan, our willingness to do this. You need to be willing to participate. If you want to sit back and just kind of coast by with your health plan, don't look at a captive. You're going to be miserable. If you want to make your health plan better, if you want your employees to have good health care and you want to control your costs and you're willing to roll up your sleeves, then you should look at a captive.
Manuel?
yeah, absolutely. One more thing, it's a long-term approach. There are ups and downs. There are years that don't work, but it's. I think that the key is to find comfort in the fact that you have like-minded people trying to do exactly the same thing. There are no freeloaders. That doesn't really work in a captive.
Awesome. Well, panelists, thank you so much for participating. And audience, I hope you can walk away from this going, hey, this is something. I know we had 64%, I think, that said that they had not considered a captive. And I do hope this is something that you may consider in the future. If there are any follow-up questions, Megan, Kathy, who should they direct those to? I'm more than happy to field any questions, but as a follow-up, if you guys want to field those, just let us know, audience.
We will
So-
be sending a thank you email, and you can reply to that email if you have any follow-up questions.
Fantastic. Well, listen, that closes our time. We've gone over a little bit, but it looks like we've had excellent participation, people staying on the call. So thank you so much. And again, Scott, good luck Thursday. Well, I guess you're not a Philadelphia fan. Anyway, Chip is, right? Chip is a Philadelphia fan. So good
Not
luck.
too late, Scott. You can be converted.
You already have
Dallas,
my
we'll see you
autographed
soon.
Philadelphia jersey.
Yeah, we'll see you soon, Dallas.
All right. Well, hey, thank you so much. You all have a great evening. And audience, thank you so much for your participation.
Thank you all. Thanks.
Yep, thank you very much.